In the vast expanse of the Galactic Academy, where the brightest minds from thousands of worlds gather to learn the art of interstellar combat, there exists an unspoken truth that chills even the bravest instructors to their core. Never underestimate a human when their pack is threatened. The other species call them Deathworlders, beings evolved from a planet so violently hostile that it forged them into something both beautiful and terrifying. They walk quietly among the stars, their pale blue eyes hiding depths of fury that can make black holes seem gentle by comparison. This is the story of what happens when that quiet facade breaks. When Cadet Marcus Chen entered the Academy's most prestigious combat program, his instructors thought they understood what they were dealing with. After all, humans had been part of the Galactic Federation for nearly 2 centuries. They'd seen human soldiers, human diplomats, human traders. They believed they knew the limits of human capability. They were wrong. Some lessons can only be learned in blood, and some teachers only realize their mistakes when it's already too late to stop what they've unleashed. In the sterile halls of the Academy, where young warriors from across the galaxy train to protect the peace of 1,000 worlds, an ancient human instinct is about to be awakened. One that will remind the universe why Earth's children are feared across the stars. The quiet ones are always the most dangerous, and Marcus Chen had been quiet for far too long. The morning alarm resonated through the dormitory complex of the Galactic Military Academy with its customary harsh efficiency. Marcus Chen's eyes opened immediately, no trace of grogginess clouding his vision as he transitioned from sleep to full alertness in the span of a heartbeat. Around him, his dorm-mates stirred with varying degrees of reluctance and complaint. Zixar, the reptilian saurian from the desert world of Krekstar, hissed his displeasure as his scaled form uncoiled from the specialized heating mat that served as his bed. His yellow eyes, designed for tracking prey across endless dunes, focused on Marcus with what could almost be mistaken for envy. "How do you do that, human?" Zixar's voice carried the characteristic lisp of his species, though his standard galactic was impeccable. "Every morning you wake like you've been struck by plasma fire. No transition, no adjustment period. It's unsettling." Marcus sat up on his regulation cot, feet finding the cold metal floor of their shared quarters. His movements were economical, practiced, carrying none of the dramatic flourishes favored by many of his classmates. "Practice," he said simply, beginning his morning routine of equipment checks. "On Earth, things that sleep too deeply don't tend to wake up at all." Across the room, Thynel of the Third Spiral, a Centaurian whose crystalline form refracted the dormitory's artificial lighting into prismatic rainbows, chimed in harmonious tones that served as their species' version of laughter. "More Deathworlder wisdom, I assume? Your planet must have been truly horrifying to produce such reflexes." Among the diverse student body of the Academy, Earth's reputation as a Class 12 death world was well known and generally respected. Most inhabited worlds ranked between Class 1 and Class 4 on the habitability scale, with Class 6 being considered extremely dangerous. Earth's rating of Class 12 placed it in a category so hostile that most species couldn't survive there for more than a few hours without life support. Marcus finished arranging his gear with military precision, each item placed exactly where regulation demanded. "Earth taught us that the universe doesn't care if you're ready or not, it'll kill you either way." He spoke without emotion, stating facts as simply as if discussing the weather. Being ready just gives you better odds. The casual way he discussed death and survival made his dormmates uncomfortable, as it always did. They came from worlds where danger was managed, contained, eliminated through technology and careful planning. The idea of living in constant awareness of mortality was alien to them. Thynel's crystalline structure dimmed slightly, their equivalent of a worried frown. "Perhaps that's why humans make such effective soldiers. You're already comfortable with concepts that terrify the rest of us." Before Marcus could respond, the dormitory's communication system crackled to life with an announcement that would set the day's tone. "All first-year cadets report to Training Complex 7 for advanced combat simulation. This is a mandatory exercise. Failure to report within 15 minutes will result in disciplinary action." Groans echoed through the dormitory as cadets from various species began the rushed process of gathering their gear. Advanced combat simulation was notorious among the student body for its intensity and the Academy's instructors' tendency to push participants to their absolute limits. As they filed out of the dormitory, Marcus noticed the tension in his classmates' postures. For most species in the Federation, combat was an abstract concept, something that happened in controlled environments with strict rules and safety protocols. Real warfare, the kind that left scars and changed people, was largely a thing of the past thanks to the technological superiority and diplomatic efforts that maintained galactic peace. Humans were one of the few exceptions. Earth had achieved spaceflight and eventual first contact while still engaged in global conflicts. The species had literally fought their way to the stars, and that heritage showed in everything from their military doctrine to their individual psychology. The walk to Training Complex 7 took them through the Academy's central plaza, a vast open space designed to accommodate students from worlds with vastly different environmental needs. Atmospheric processors maintain distinct climate zones, allowing Aquarian gill breathers to walk alongside desert-adapted saurians and crystalline centaurians who required specific mineral concentrations in the air. Marcus moved through this diverse crowd with the same quiet efficiency that characterized everything he did. He didn't push or shove, didn't raise his voice or draw attention to himself. Yet somehow other students moved out of his way without conscious thought, some primitive part of their brains recognizing something dangerous in his controlled stillness. "I heard Instructor Vachmore is running today's simulation," Zixar mentioned as they approached the training complex, his scaled hide rippling with nervous energy. "They say he's been looking for an excuse to wash out some of the human cadets." Claims they're too aggressive for proper military service. Cordenprint. Vachmore has never served in actual combat, has he? His record shows only training positions and administrative roles. Marcus said nothing, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Instructor Vachmore was a hegemony officer, member of a species that had achieved spaceflight through careful manipulation and political maneuvering rather than technological innovation or military prowess. The hegemony had a reputation for viewing humans with suspicion, considering them unnecessarily violent and potentially destabilizing to galactic peace. Training Complex 7 was a massive structure that could simulate environments from hundreds of different worlds. As the cadets filed into the preparation area, they were greeted by the imposing figure of Instructor Vachmore himself. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, his elongated form was covered in the pale gray skin typical of his species. His large, dark eyes surveyed the assembled students with what appeared to be disappointment. "Cadets," his voice resonated with artificial amplification, carrying easily across the vast space, "today you will participate in a combat scenario designed to test your ability to function as a unit under extreme stress. You will be divided into 2 teams and tasked with completing opposing objectives while engaging in simulated combat." He gestured to a massive holographic display that materialized behind him, showing a complex urban environment with multiple levels and countless potential ambush points. The scenario is based on the Battle of Kepler Station, a historical conflict that resulted in significant casualties due to poor coordination and aggressive tactics employed by certain species. The emphasis on certain species and the pointed look toward the human cadets made Vachmore's agenda clear. Marcus felt his doormates shift uncomfortably beside him, aware of the instructor's bias but uncertain how to address it. "Team Alpha will be tasked with securing the Central Command Center," Vachmore continued, his gaze lingering on Marcus. "Team Beta will attempt to prevent this while extracting valuable intelligence from secondary locations. Both teams will be equipped with standard training weapons that deliver simulated damage. When the computer determines you have sustained sufficient injury to be combat ineffective, you will be removed from the exercise." The instructor's expression shifted into what might have been a smile, though on his alien features it appeared more predatory than friendly. "I should mention that this particular simulation has a 97% casualty rate. Most cadets find themselves killed within the first 30 minutes. We'll see if any of you can do better." As team assignments were announced, Marcus found himself placed on Team Alpha along with several other human cadets and a mix of species from across the Federation. Team Beta, he noted, was heavily weighted with physically powerful species and students known for their aggressive tactics. "This isn't fair," whispered Sarah Kim, a fellow human cadet whose expertise lay in engineering and technical support. "He stacked the teams to make us look bad." Marcus checked his simulated weapon, a standard-issue pulse rifle configured for training exercises. "Fair isn't the point," he said quietly. "He wants to see us fail so we don't fail." We adapt at Zixhar, who had been assigned to Marcus's team, approached with his equipment already configured and ready. "What do you mean adapt? The scenario parameters are already set. We can't change the fundamental structure of the exercise." For the first time that morning, Marcus allowed himself a small smile, though there was no warmth in it. Instructor Vackmore made one mistake. He based this simulation on a historical battle, which means it follows historical logic and tactical assumptions. But those assumptions were made by people who never fought humans. The preparation area's lighting shifted to amber as final warnings were announced. Teams were directed to their starting positions, Team Alpha gathering in what simulated a forward operating base several kilometers from their objective. The environment around them materialized with stunning realism. Marcus could smell the recycled air, feel the vibration of simulated machinery, even sense the subtle gravitational differences that would exist on an actual space station. "Simulation commencing in 60 seconds, announced the computer's neutral voice. "All participants prepare for combat operations." As his teammates made final equipment checks and discussed basic tactical approaches, Marcus stood quietly, his eyes closed, breathing slowly and deeply. To an outside observer, he might have appeared to be meditating or simply trying to calm pre-combat nerves. In reality, he was doing something far more complex and infinitely more dangerous. He was letting Earth wake up inside him. Every human carried within them the genetic memory of a world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. Predators that hunted in packs, weather that could destroy civilizations, diseases that swept across continents, and always the knowledge that survival meant being harder, faster, and more ruthlessly efficient than everything else that wanted to live. Most humans learned to suppress these instincts. Civilization required cooperation, restraint, the ability to resolve conflicts without violence. But in moments of genuine threat, when the safety of the pack was at stake, those ancient programs could be activated. 10 seconds to simulation start, the computer announced. Marcus opened his eyes, and for just a moment his doormates saw something that made them step back unconsciously. His pupils had dilated slightly, his posture had shifted into something predatory, and the air around him seemed to carry a subtle charge of potential violence. Then the simulation began, and there was no more time for observation or worry. The battle for Kepler Station had commenced, and Instructor Vackmore was about to learn why Earth's children were feared across the galaxy. The opening seconds of combat unfolded exactly as the historical record suggested they would. Team Beta moved aggressively toward the Central Command Center using overwhelming force and superior numbers to establish early tactical advantage. Their strategy was sound, based on proven military doctrine and executed with textbook precision. It should have worked. Against any other opponents, it would have worked. Marcus moved through the simulated environment like water flowing around obstacles, his every step calculated to avoid detection while positioning him for maximum tactical advantage. Behind him, his teammates struggled to keep pace, their movements generating noise and exposing them to potential enemy fire. "Chen, slow down!" hissed Lieutenant Vrax, a Altarian whose forearms and enhanced reflexes made him one of the Academy's most promising tactical officers. "You're moving too fast for the rest of us to maintain formation." Marcus paused at a junction between corridors, his head tilted slightly as he listened to sounds that his teammates couldn't detect. Footsteps. 3 individuals, moving with military precision but betraying their position through the subtle vibrations carried by the station's metal structure. Team Beta had sent a flanking force. "Contact incoming," he whispered into his comm unit. 3 hostiles approaching from Vector 7, 30 seconds to engagement range. Quick. Vegs checked his tactical display, frowning when it showed no enemy signatures in the indicated direction. "Negative, Chen. Sensors show clear corridors in all directions. You're seeing things, Ed." 28 seconds later, pulse rifle fire erupted from exactly where Marcus had predicted it would. The ambush would have devastated his team, catching them in a crossfire with no cover and no avenue for retreat. Instead, Marcus had already moved into position, his return fire surgical and precise. 2 of the 3 attackers were immediately tagged as killed by the simulation's computer. The third managed to retreat, but not before Marcus had marked his position and radioed it to his teammates. "How did you know?" Sarah Kim asked, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and concern. "The sensors didn't detect anything." Marcus was already moving toward their objective, his weapon at ready position as he scanned for additional threats. Sensors can be fooled. Evolution can't. The next 30 minutes of the simulation proved to be unlike anything the Academy's instructors had ever witnessed. Marcus didn't just participate in the exercise, he dominated it. Every ambush was detected before it could be sprung. Every tactical maneuver was anticipated and countered. Every attempt by Team Beta to gain advantage was systematically dismantled. More disturbing to the observing instructors was the way Marcus's teammates began to change. Exposed to his methods and following his lead, they started moving differently, thinking differently, responding to threats with a speed and efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Zixar found himself sliding through ventilation shafts with serpentine grace, using his natural camouflage abilities in ways he'd never considered before. Thynel discovered that their crystalline structure could refract light to create tactical advantages, effectively becoming invisible when positioned correctly. Even the more peaceful species began displaying combat instincts they didn't know they possessed. But it was Marcus himself who truly terrified those watching from the observation deck. He moved through the simulated battle like a force of nature, appearing where enemies least expected him, striking with overwhelming force before vanishing back into the environment. His tactics weren't just effective, they were ruthless, displaying a level of tactical sophistication that suggested actual combat experience despite his young age. "This isn't normal cadet behavior," observed Commander Thexuri, the Academy's chief tactical instructor. "His movement patterns suggest advanced special forces training. Where did a 19-year-old human acquire these skills?" Instructor Vakmore watched the displays with growing unease as his carefully constructed scenario fell apart. Team Beta, despite their advantages in numbers and equipment, was being systematically hunted and eliminated. Worse, they were beginning to show signs of genuine fear, an emotion that shouldn't exist in a training simulation. "Computer," he ordered, "increase difficulty parameters for Team Beta. Provide additional resources and tactical support. Implementing tactical enhancement protocols." I performed the new tariff trips protocols and developing increases to heavy weapons and advanced sensors. It was far beyond anything that would be available in a normal training exercise, but Vakmore was determined to prove his point about human aggression and unsuitability for civilized military service. The enhancement lasted exactly 7 minutes. Marcus adapted to the changing conditions with a fluidity that defied explanation. When Team Beta's improved sensors began tracking his movement, he started using the station's own systems against them, triggering false alarms and creating sensor shadows that masked his approach. When they brought heavy weapons to bear, he turned their superior firepower into a liability, using their own shots to damage station infrastructure and create tactical opportunities. Most importantly, he began teaching his teammates to think like predators rather than prey. The gentle Thino learned to use misdirection and ambush tactics. The proud Vrex discovered the tactical value of patience and stealth. Even Sarah Kim found herself setting elaborate traps that turned the environment itself into a weapon. By the time Team Alpha reached the Central Command Center, they had eliminated every member of Team Beta without sustaining a single casualty. The historical Battle of Kepler's Station had ended with mutual annihilation and strategic failure. Marcus's version concluded with total victory achieved through methods that left the Academy's instructors speechless. "Simulation complete," announced the computer. "Team Alpha achieves primary objective with 0 casualties. Performance metrics exceed all previous records." As the teams filed out of the simulation chamber, Instructor Vakmore found himself faced with a result he hadn't anticipated. He had intended to demonstrate human unsuitability for military command, but instead had showcased capabilities that bordered on the superhuman. Marcus walked past him without acknowledgement, his expression calm and controlled, showing no sign of the lethal efficiency he had displayed moments before. To all appearances, he was simply a quiet young man returning from a routine training exercise. But Vakmor had seen what lay beneath that quiet exterior, and for the first time in his career, the instructor found himself wondering if there were some forces in the universe that were better left undisturbed. The day was far from over, and the Academy was about to learn that some lessons could only be taught in blood. The Academy's central cafeteria buzzed with conversations in dozens of languages as cadets from across the galaxy gathered for their midday meal. The vast space was designed to accommodate the dietary needs of hundreds of species, with specialized food preparation areas maintaining everything from methane-rich atmospheres for the gas-breathing Etherians to high radiation zones where the crystalline Nixari absorbed cosmic energy. Marcus sat with his usual group, methodically consuming what appeared to be a standard protein synthesis meal, but was actually carefully calibrated to meet human nutritional requirements in the Academy's artificial environment. Around him, his dormmates discussed the morning's simulation with excitement that bordered on amazement. "I still can't believe how completely we dominated that exercise," Thynel chimed, their crystalline form flickering with colors that indicated enthusiasm. "The instructors' faces when we achieved total victory. I've never seen anything like that reaction." Zixar coiled his serpentine form more comfortably around his specialized seating, yellow eyes focused on Marcus with newfound respect. "You changed how we all fought. It was like you awakened something inside each of us that we didn't know existed. How did you know I could move through those ventilation systems so effectively?" Marcus paused his eating, considering the question. Around them, conversations at other tables had grown quieter, and he was aware of increased attention from their fellow cadets. Word of Team Alpha's unprecedented performance had spread quickly through the Academy's social networks. "Every species evolved to survive their environment," he said quietly. "Yours gave you flexibility and natural camouflage. The problem isn't capability, it's that most civilized worlds have eliminated the need to use survival instincts. You forget what you can do because you don't need to remember." Sarah Kim leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Is that what happened to you during the simulation? You seemed different, more intense. Like you were operating on an entirely different level than the rest of us." Before Marcus could respond, a shadow fell across their table. They looked up to see Cadet Korath Vex, a massive hegemony warrior whose species was renowned for their physical strength and aggressive nature. Standing nearly 2.5 meters tall, with chitinous armor plating covering his muscular frame, Korath was everything that Marcus appeared not to be: obvious, intimidating, and eager for confrontation. "The famous human tactical genius," Korath's voice rumbled with barely contained hostility. "I hear you put on quite a show this morning. Managed to embarrass some of my classmates in that little war game." The cafeteria's ambient noise level dropped noticeably as nearby tables turned their attention to the unfolding confrontation. Korath was known for his short temper and tendency toward violence, traits that had earned him multiple disciplinary actions but hadn't been enough to remove him from the Academy due to his influential family connections. Marcus looked up calmly, meeting the larger cadet's glare with steady eyes. "It was just a training exercise, nothing personal." Korath's mandibles clicked with amusement, a sound that sent primitive shivers down the spines of prey species within hearing range. "Nothing personal? You made my teammates look like incompetent children. Some of them are questioning their own abilities because of your performance." Zixar shifted uncomfortably, his scales rippling with nervous energy. Confrontations between cadets were strictly forbidden, but Korath's family held significant political influence within the hegemony hierarchy. Disciplinary action against him was often minimal and rarely permanent. "Maybe they should question their abilities," Marcus replied, his tone remaining level and controlled. "If a training exercise can shake their confidence that badly, how will they handle real combat?" The insult was subtle but unmistakable, and the surrounding cadets inhaled collectively as Korath's chitinous plates flared with anger. The hegemony warrior's hands clenched into fists large enough to crush human bones. You think you're clever, Deathworlder? Your species may have impressed some of the instructors with your aggression, but we know what you really are. Barely contained savages who achieved spaceflight through luck and violence. You don't belong among civilized beings. The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of species watching the confrontation unfold. Many had never witnessed direct interspecies hostility, especially not the kind that carried undertones of genuine hatred. Marcus stood slowly, his movement controlled and deliberate. Even standing, he was dwarfed by Korath's massive frame, appearing almost fragile in comparison. But something in his posture, the way he balanced his weight and positioned his hands, suggested that appearances might be deceiving. "You're entitled to your opinion," Marcus said quietly, "but if you have a problem with my performance, maybe you should take it up with the instructors. Or better yet, request to face me in a proper combat evaluation." Korath's laugh was harsh and grating. "Combat evaluation? Against you? I could break you in half without even trying, human. Your species might be good at hiding and ambushing from shadows, but in a fair fight, you're nothing." The challenge was explicit now, and Academy regulations were clear about how such situations should be handled. Combat disputes between cadets were to be resolved through official channels under instructor supervision, not through casual violence in common areas. Unfortunately, Korath had never been particularly concerned with regulations. His massive fist swung toward Marcus's head with surprising speed, driven by alien muscle structure that could generate forces capable of denting battle armor. It should have been a devastating blow, one that would end the confrontation before it truly began. Instead, Marcus was simply no longer there. The human had moved with fluid grace that defied physics, stepping inside Korath's reach while redirecting the larger being's momentum. What followed happened so quickly that most observers couldn't process the individual movements. They saw only the result. Korath found himself face down on the cafeteria floor, his arm twisted behind his back at an angle that suggested significant joint damage if he tried to move. Marcus knelt beside him, one hand maintaining the controlling hold while the other rested gently on the base of Korath's skull, positioned where a slight increase in pressure would target critical nerve clusters. "The thing about fair fights," Marcus said conversationally, his voice carrying clearly in the silence, "is that they only exist in training exercises. Everything else is just survival." The entire confrontation had lasted less than 3 seconds. Korath struggled briefly, then stopped as he realized the futility of his position. The joint lock was professionally applied, designed to cause immediate and escalating damage if he resisted. More concerning was the human's other hand, which rested against nerve points that could cause paralysis or unconsciousness depending on the pressure applied. "Let me go, human," Korath growled, though his tone had lost much of its earlier arrogance. "This proves nothing. You used tricks and deception instead of fighting with honor." Marcus's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a note of something cold and dangerous. "Honor is for people who can afford it. Everyone else just tries to go home." Before the situation could escalate further, the sharp crack of command authority cut through the cafeteria's tense silence. "Attention!" The voice belonged to Sergeant Major Dextree, a Vorthan whose species served as the Academy's primary disciplinary force. Standing nearly 4 meters tall, with natural armor plating and sensory organs that could detect emotional states, the Vorthans had evolved as natural peacekeepers and were practically impossible to lie to or deceive. Every cadet in the cafeteria snapped to attention, including Marcus, who smoothly released Korath and stepped back while maintaining perfect military posture. Korath struggled to his feet, favoring the arm that had been locked. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. "Cadet Vex, Cadet Chen." Sergeant Major Dextree's voice carried harmonics that indicated severe displeasure. "You will report to my office immediately. The rest of you will return to your meals and conversations." This entertainment is concluded. As the 2 cadets followed the imposing Vorthan out of the cafeteria, conversations slowly resumed around them, though the topics had shifted dramatically. Word of the confrontation would spread throughout the academy within hours, creating ripple effects that would influence social dynamics for months to come. The walk to the disciplinary office passed in tense silence. Korath nursed his injured arm while shooting venomous glares at Marcus, who appeared completely calm and unaffected by the situation. The human's casual attitude toward what could be career-ending disciplinary action only served to increase the hegemony warrior's frustration. Sergeant Major Dextry's office was a study in efficient intimidation. The walls displayed commendations and battle honors from conflicts across the galaxy, while strategic lighting cast shadows that emphasized the occupant's imposing physical presence. 2 chairs sat before a massive desk, though they were clearly designed to make visitors feel small and vulnerable. "Sit!" Dextry commanded, settling behind his desk with the fluid grace of a natural predator. His primary sensory organs focused on each cadet in turn, analyzing their emotional states and physiological responses with scientific precision. "Now then," he continued, "I'm certain you both understand that physical altercations between cadets are strictly prohibited. The Academy maintains a zero-tolerance policy regarding violence outside of supervised training exercises. Can either of you explain why I shouldn't have you both expelled within the hour?" "Sergeant Major, I was merely engaged in conversation with Cadet Chen when he launched an unprovoked attack. I was defending myself against an aggressive Deathworlder who clearly lacks the emotional control necessary for military service." The accusation was smoothly delivered and technically plausible. Without witnesses willing to contradict his version of events, it would be difficult to prove otherwise. Moreover, Korath's family connections meant that disciplinary action against him would face significant political pressure from hegemony authorities. Dextry's sensory organs shifted to Marcus, analyzing his responses to the accusation. "Cadet Chen, how do you respond to these charges?" Marcus met the Sergeant Major's gaze directly, his expression calm and controlled. "I was attacked by Cadet Vex and defended myself using minimal necessary force. I made no aggressive moves until he struck at me. Everything I did was reactive and proportional." "Proportional?" Korath's voice rose with indignation. "You could have killed me!" "That hold you used was designed to cause permanent damage." For the first time since entering the office, Marcus's expression shifted slightly, revealing something that made both Korath and Sergeant Major Dextry pause. It wasn't anger or hostility, it was the cold calculation of someone evaluating threat levels and response options. "If I had wanted to kill you," Marcus said quietly, "you would be dead. What I used was a basic restraint hold designed to end confrontation with minimal injury. If you're experiencing pain, it's because you resisted instead of submitting to lawful restraint." The casual way he discussed lethality sent chills down Korath's spine. There had been no boasting, no emotional heat, just the simple statement of fact from someone who understood exactly how much damage he could inflict. Sergeant Major Dextry leaned back in his chair, his sensory organs working overtime to analyze the complex emotional dynamics playing out before him. His species' natural ability to detect deception was showing him a troubling pattern of responses that didn't match either cadet's official statements. "Cadet Vex," he said finally, "my sensors indicate significant stress patterns associated with deception. Would you care to revise your account of what occurred in the cafeteria?" Korath's chitinous plates shifted with agitation. Being caught in a lie by a Vorthan was virtually impossible to deny, but admitting to starting the confrontation would open him to serious disciplinary action. "Perhaps I misremembered some details," he said reluctantly. "The situation developed very quickly. It's possible that I initiated physical contact, but it was intended as a friendly gesture that was misinterpreted." The Sergeant Major's expression suggested he found this explanation less than convincing. A friendly gesture that resulted in joint damage and required medical restraint techniques? Before Korath could formulate another excuse, the office's communication system activated with an incoming priority message. Sergeant Major Dextry accepted the transmission, and Instructor Vokmore's image materialized above the desk projector. "Sergeant Major, I trust you're handling the situation with Cadets Chen and Vex appropriately." I've reviewed the cafeteria security recordings and have some additional context that may be relevant to your disciplinary decisions. Security recordings would show exactly what had occurred, making denial impossible. More concerning was Vakmor's involvement. The instructor had demonstrated clear bias against human cadets and would likely use this incident to advance his agenda. I'm reviewing the case now, Instructor, Dextry replied. What additional information do you have? Vakmor's expression carried satisfaction as he continued. I believe this incident demonstrates exactly the kind of aggressive instability that makes humans unsuitable for positions of military authority. Cadet Chen's response to verbal provocation was disproportionate and potentially lethal. I recommend immediate dismissal and psychological evaluation. The recommendation was harsh but not unexpected. What surprised Marcus was the sergeant major's response, or rather, his lack of one. Dextry's sensory organs had shifted to focus intensely on the transmission, and his expression had taken on the calculating look of someone processing information that didn't match his expectations. Instructor Vakmor, he said carefully, I appreciate your input, but I prefer to conduct my own analysis before reaching conclusions. I'll review all available evidence and render appropriate judgment. The dismissal was polite but firm, and Vakmor's image flickered with annoyance before the transmission ended. In the silence that followed, Sergeant Major Dextry sat quietly for several moments, his sensory organs working overtime as he processed the complex dynamics of the situation. Finally, he spoke. Cadets, you're both dismissed pending further investigation. You will return to your regular schedules and avoid any further contact with each other until this matter is resolved. Is that understood? Both cadets acknowledged the order and prepared to leave, but as they reached the door, Dextry's voice stopped them. Cadet Chen, a moment of your time, please. Marcus returned to his chair while Korath left, the hegemony warrior's expression promising future complications. When they were alone, the sergeant major's demeanor shifted subtly, becoming less formally intimidating and more genuinely curious. Tell me, cadet, where did you learn those restraint techniques? They're not part of standard academy curriculum, and they're considerably more sophisticated than basic self-defense training. Marcus considered his response carefully. My father was military police on Earth. He taught me some techniques for personal protection when I was growing up. It was technically true, though it omitted significant details about the nature of that training and the circumstances that had made it necessary. Earth's integration into the galactic community hadn't eliminated all of the planet's conflicts, and military families often found themselves targets for various extremist groups who opposed human participation in interstellar affairs. I see, Dextry said thoughtfully. And how much of your father's training focused on combat psychology and threat assessment? The question was more perceptive than Marcus had expected. Enough to keep me alive, he answered honestly. Sergeant Major Dextry nodded slowly, his sensory organs detecting layers of truth and carefully omitted information in the young human's responses. Cadet Chen, I want you to understand something. What occurred in the cafeteria today was recorded by multiple security systems and witnessed by hundreds of your fellow cadets. Within hours, everyone at this academy will know that a human cadet neutralized one of our largest and most physically powerful students in approximately 3 seconds. Marcus waited, uncertain where the conversation was heading. That kind of demonstration will have consequences, Dextry continued. Some of your fellow cadets will be impressed, others will be frightened, a few will view it as a challenge to be overcome. How you handle those reactions will determine whether this incident becomes a footnote in your academy record or the beginning of a much larger problem. The warning was clear, and Marcus appreciated the sergeant major's direct approach. What would you recommend, sir? For the first time during the interview, Dextry allowed himself a slight smile. Be very careful about revealing what else you're capable of, cadet. Some capabilities are better kept in reserve until they're truly needed. As Marcus left the disciplinary office, he reflected on the day's events and their likely consequences. The morning simulation had already established him as someone to watch among the Academy's tactical instructors. The cafeteria incident would cement his reputation among the student body as someone not to challenge lightly. But reputations, he knew, could be both protective and dangerous. They drew attention from people who might prefer to remain unnoticed, and they created expectations that could be difficult to manage. Walking through the academy's corridors toward his next scheduled class, Marcus was aware of the changed dynamic around him. Conversation stopped when he passed, resumed in whispers after he was gone. Cadets from prey species moved aside unconsciously, while those from warrior cultures watched him with new assessment. He had tried to remain quiet, unremarkable, just another cadet working his way through the Academy's programs. But Earth's children couldn't hide their nature forever, and the galaxy was beginning to remember why Deathworlders were feared across the stars. The day was far from over, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that his quiet time at the Academy was rapidly coming to an end. 3 days after the cafeteria incident, Marcus had hoped the attention would begin to fade. Instead, it had intensified in ways that made his daily routine increasingly complicated. Word of his confrontation with Korath had spread far beyond the Academy's student body, reaching instructors, administrators, and even some members of the Galactic Federation's military command structure. The morning found him in advanced xenobiology, a course required for all cadets who might serve in joint species operations. Professor Kethmira, a brilliant Aquarian whose translucent form floated in a specialized mobility suit filled with her species' native atmospheric mixture, was conducting a lecture on interspecies psychological dynamics. The key to successful military cooperation, she explained, her voice carrying the melodic tones typical of her aquatic species, lies in understanding how different evolutionary pressures have shaped various cognitive patterns. Each species brings unique strengths and weaknesses to any collaborative effort. Her large compound eyes swept across the lecture hall, pausing momentarily on Marcus before continuing. For example, species that evolved as persistence hunters often display exceptional patience and analytical thinking, while those descended from ambush predators tend toward quick decision-making and aggressive tactical responses. The comment was clearly directed at him, though delivered with academic neutrality. Since the cafeteria incident, several instructors had begun incorporating subtle references to human psychology and behavior patterns into their lectures. Marcus suspected they were trying to understand what they had witnessed without directly addressing the situation. Beside him, Sarah Kim took detailed notes while occasionally shooting worried glances in his direction. The past 3 days had been difficult for all the human cadets, as their association with Marcus had drawn unwanted attention from both instructors and fellow students. Chen, Professor Kethmira's voice interrupted his thoughts. Given your recent practical demonstration of interspecies conflict resolution, perhaps you could share your perspective on how evolutionary psychology affects modern military cooperation. But Marcus recognized it as both a test and a trap. Any response that emphasized human advantages might reinforce negative stereotypes about Deathworlder aggression. Deflecting the question entirely would suggest evasiveness or lack of understanding. Professor, he replied carefully, I think the most important factor is recognizing that every species' strengths can become weaknesses under the wrong circumstances. Evolutionary advantages that help survival on homeworlds might be counterproductive in cooperative environments. Interesting, Kethmira noted, her form shifting slightly within her mobility suit. Can you provide a specific example? Marcus considered his words carefully. Around him, the lecture hall had grown quiet as students from dozens of species focused on his response. Human persistence hunting requires extended focus and the ability to ignore immediate discomfort in favor of long-term objectives. In cooperative situations, this can appear as stubbornness or inability to adapt to changing conditions. The answer was diplomatically neutral while acknowledging potential human limitations. Professor Kethmira's compound eyes reflected what might have been approval. Aggressive tendencies that some species display? The question came from the back of the hall, posed by a centaurian whose crystalline form flickered with nervous energy. Before Marcus could respond, the lecture hall's emergency communications system activated with a priority alert that froze every conversation in mid-sentence. All cadets and instructors report to designated emergency stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, all personnel to emergency stations. Academy lockdown protocols are now in effect. The announcement triggered immediate chaos as hundreds of cadets from diverse species attempted to evacuate the lecture hall simultaneously. Emergency protocols were rarely activated at the Academy and never during normal academic periods. The implications were alarming enough to override normal social hierarchies as prey species and predators alike moved toward exits with equal urgency. Marcus found himself separated from his usual group as the crowd pressed toward the emergency exits. The Academy's emergency protocols were designed to handle various crisis scenarios, from natural disasters to hostile attacks, but the specific nature of the current threat remained unclear. As they reached the designated emergency assembly area, a vast underground complex designed to shelter the Academy's population during extreme situations, fragmentary information began circulating among the gathered cadets and instructors. Security forces were positioning themselves at strategic points, automated defense systems were powering up, and communication with off-world authorities had been restricted to emergency channels only. "What's happening?" Sarah Kim managed to find Marcus in the confused crowd of evacuating personnel. Her engineering background made her naturally curious about technical aspects of the emergency protocols, but also more aware of how serious the situation must be to trigger such comprehensive responses. Before Marcus could answer, Sergeant Major Dextry's voice boomed across the assembly area with enhanced amplification. "All personnel will remain in designated areas until further notice. Squad leaders will conduct accountability formations. No one is authorized to leave this facility without direct approval from command authority." The formal language and obvious tension in the Vorthan's voice suggested something far more serious than a routine emergency drill. Around them, cadets from various species clustered in familiar groups, seeking comfort in shared heritage as uncertainty mounted. Marcus noticed several instructors gathering near emergency communication stations, their expressions grave as they received information denied to the general Academy population. Whatever was happening, it was significant enough to warrant complete isolation protocols. "Chen." The voice belonged to Instructor Vachmore, who approached with an expression that mixed authority with something approaching fear. "You and the other human cadets are to report to Conference Room 7 immediately." In emergency situations, segregation by species usually indicated either specialized response requirements or suspected security threats. Neither possibility was particularly reassuring. The human cadets Marcus, Sarah, and 6 others from various class levels followed Vachmore through corridors that had taken on an ominous quality under emergency lighting. The Academy's normally welcoming environment had been transformed into something that felt more like a military bunker, complete with armed security patrols and sealed blast doors. Conference Room 7 was typically used for advanced tactical planning exercises, its walls lined with holographic displays capable of presenting complex three-dimensional scenarios. Today, those displays showed real-time data feeds from across the local star system, tracking the movements of ships, stations, and defensive installations with military precision. Waiting for them was Admiral Thextar, the Academy's commandant, along with several other senior officers whose species Marcus didn't immediately recognize. The presence of flag-rank officers during what should have been a routine academic day suggested a crisis of significant proportions. "Cadets," Admiral Thextar began without preamble, his authoritative voice carrying the weight of decades in command positions. "Approximately 30 to 7 minutes ago, long-range sensors detected an unidentified fleet entering this star system. Analysis suggests 12 capital-class vessels and approximately 40 support ships, all displaying technology signatures that don't match any known Federation member species." The information was delivered with military efficiency, but its implications were staggering. Unknown fleets didn't simply appear in core Federation systems without triggering responses that could escalate to interstellar conflict. The fact that the Academy's human cadets had been specifically briefed suggested their involvement was somehow relevant. "Sir," Sarah Kim raised her hand tentatively, "why are we receiving this briefing separately from our classmates?" Admiral Thextar exchanged glances with his staff before responding, "Because preliminary analysis of the unknown vessels suggests they may be of human origin. Specifically, they appear to match design signatures from Earth's pre-Federation colonial expansion efforts. The statement hit the assembled cadets like physical blows. Earth's pre-Federation period had been marked by significant internal conflicts and several colonial ventures that had ended in disaster or disappearance. The idea that one of those lost colonies might have survived and developed independent military capabilities was both exciting and terrifying. "That's impossible," protested James Crawford, a senior cadet whose family had been among Earth's first interstellar diplomats. "All the colony missions either succeeded and maintained contact or failed completely. There were no successful independent developments." Instructor Vockmore stepped forward, his expression grim. "That was the official assessment. Recent intelligence suggests it may have been incomplete." He gestured to one of the holographic displays, which shifted to show detailed scans of the approaching vessels. The ships were clearly of human design aesthetic, but incorporating technologies that seemed decades ahead of anything in the Federation's current inventory. The lead vessel has transmitted a general communication requesting permission to approach the academies specifically. They claim to represent something called the Terran Colonial Republic and insist on speaking with representatives of Earth's government immediately. Marcus studied the ship designs with growing unease. They incorporated design elements that were unmistakably human, but modified in ways that suggested extensive combat experience and technological innovation. These weren't exploration vessels or research ships. They were built for war. "What do they want?" he asked. Admiral Thextar's expression grew even more serious. "According to their transmission, they're here to discuss what they call the human debt to the galaxy and to make certain demands regarding Earth's relationship with the Federation. They also specifically requested that any human military personnel be made available for consultation." The implications were becoming clear, and they weren't reassuring. If these ships represented some form of human colonial government that had developed independently from Federation oversight, their arrival could destabilize interstellar politics on a scale that hadn't been seen since first contact. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "are you asking us to participate in diplomatic contact with these ships?" "Negative," Admiral Thextar replied firmly. "You're here because your presence at the Academy represents a potential security risk. If these colonials have hostile intentions, human cadets could become targets for recruitment, coercion, or elimination." The blunt assessment sent chills through the assembled cadets. The possibility that their heritage might make them enemies of their classmates and instructors was something none of them had seriously considered before. Before anyone could respond, the conference room's communication system activated with an emergency transmission. The image that appeared on the main display showed the bridge of one of the approaching ships, and the figure standing at its center was unmistakably human. She appeared to be in her 40s with the pale complexion and lean build typical of spaceborne populations. Her uniform was military in cut, but incorporated design elements that seemed both familiar and alien. When she spoke, her accent carried undertones that suggested generations of linguistic drift from terrestrial norms. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Republic vessel, New Horizon. We request immediate communication with Earth's governmental representatives and any human military personnel currently stationed at this facility." The name sent shockwaves through the assembled cadets, particularly Marcus, whose own surname created uncomfortable implications about potential family connections to these mysterious colonials. "We have urgent information regarding threats to human-occupied territories and require coordination with Earth-based authorities to address these threats effectively. We also need to discuss certain historical injustices that require resolution before we can establish formal diplomatic relations with the Federation." Admiral Thextar stepped forward, though he remained outside the transmission's visual pickup range. "This is Admiral Thextar, Commandant of the Galactic Military Academy." "Unknown vessel, you have entered Federation space without authorization and are making demands that exceed appropriate diplomatic protocols. State your specific intentions and legal authority for this approach." The Colonial Admiral's expression hardened noticeably. "Admiral, with all due respect, we're not seeking Federation permission to exist or to defend ourselves. We're offering information and cooperation regarding threats that could affect human populations throughout this region of space. Whether you choose to accept that cooperation is entirely up to you." Her tone carried undertones of barely controlled anger and something approaching desperation. These weren't aggressive colonials seeking to expand their territory. They were representatives of people who felt abandoned and were now facing some form of existential threat. However, Admiral Chen continued, "I should point out that our fleet includes several ships whose crews have family connections to cadets currently enrolled in your academy. We would very much like to verify their safety and well-being before proceeding with formal negotiations." The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. If harm came to the human cadets, these colonials would consider it an act of war against their people. The Academy had just become a potential flashpoint for interstellar conflict. Marcus felt the weight of every eye in the room focusing on him as the implications became clear. His quiet existence at the Academy had just become infinitely more complicated, and the galaxy was about to discover that some debts could only be paid in blood. The colonial fleet was still approaching, their intentions remained unclear, and somewhere in the darkness between the stars, other forces were apparently moving against human populations with purposes that had driven desperate colonials to risk everything for a chance at Earth's aid. The Academy's emergency protocols were about to be tested in ways their designers had never imagined, and Marcus was beginning to suspect that his father's training had prepared him for exactly this kind of situation. Earth's children were about to remind the galaxy why they had been feared across the stars and why some quiet people were the most dangerous of all. The tension in Conference Room 7 reached a breaking point as Admiral Chen's transmission continued, her image filling the main display with an intensity that made the assembled cadets unconsciously step backward. The Colonial Admiral's eyes seemed to look directly at each of them, searching for something that only she understood. "I'm going to be very specific about our situation," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much and lost too much to maintain diplomatic niceties. 18 months ago, our outer colonies began disappearing. Not destroyed, disappeared. Ships would arrive at established settlements to find empty cities, abandoned infrastructure, and no trace of human populations. The holographic display shifted to show star charts marked with red indicators scattered across a region of space that extended far beyond Federation territory. Each indicator represented a lost colony, a failed settlement, a group of humans who had vanished without explanation. At first, we assumed it was natural disasters, equipment failures, maybe hostile alien wildlife. But the pattern was too consistent, too complete. These weren't random disappearances, they were systematic harvesting operations. Admiral Thextar leaned forward, his expression grave. "Harvesting? What evidence do you have to support such a claim?" Admiral Chen's smile was cold and bitter. "We captured one of their scout vessels 3 months ago. The crew wasn't human, and their ship's computer contained detailed biological surveys of human settlements, population assessments, and what appeared to be shipping schedules." She gestured to someone off-screen, and the display changed again to show images that made several of the Academy officers step back in revulsion. The photograph showed alien technology clearly designed for biological containment and transport, with modifications that suggested human-specific requirements. The species call themselves the Devourers, a translation from their actual name which is unpronounceable by human vocal cords. They're nomadic, consume other intelligent species for both nutrition and some form of psychological satisfaction, and they've decided that humans represent a particularly valuable resource. The Federation had encountered aggressive species before, but the concept of systematic predation on intelligent beings was so fundamentally horrifying that most civilized governments considered it impossible. Why haven't you brought this information to Federation authorities through proper diplomatic channels? Admiral Thextar demanded. Admiral Chen's expression hardened even further. "Because we tried that first. 18 months ago, when the disappearances began, we sent delegations to Federation outposts requesting military assistance and protection for our colonies. We were told that human settlements outside Federation territory weren't entitled to military support and that we should consider relocating to approved worlds under Federation oversight. If true, it suggested that Federation bureaucracy had condemned thousands of humans to death, or worse through administrative indifference. Marcus found himself speaking before he had consciously decided to do so. How many people have been taken? Admiral Chen's eyes fixed on him with laser intensity. Conservative estimates suggest 40,000 humans have been harvested over the past 18 months. 3 entire worlds, dozens of space stations, hundreds of ships. The Devourers are systematic, efficient, and completely without mercy. The number was staggering. 40,000 people represented the equivalent of several major cities, all vanished without the Federation even being aware of the threat. The scope of the tragedy was almost impossible to process. "What do you want from us?" Sarah Kim asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We want what we should have received 18 months ago," Admiral Chen replied. "Military support, technological assistance, and formal recognition that human lives matter regardless of their political status within the Federation. But mostly, we want warning systems that will let human settlements know when the Devourers are approaching." She paused, her expression shifting to something approaching desperation. "They're moving toward Federation space. Our intelligence suggests they're planning to target Earth itself within the next 6 months. This isn't just a colonial problem anymore. It's a threat to every human in the galaxy." The implications were staggering. If these Devourers were indeed planning to attack Earth, it would represent the first direct assault on a core Federation world in over a century. The political and military ramifications could destabilize interstellar peace on a scale not seen since the formation of the Federation itself. Admiral Thextar activated his personal communication device, speaking in rapid, clipped tones to unseen superiors. While he conducted urgent consultations with higher authorities, the Colonial Admiral continued her briefing with information that painted an increasingly dire picture. "The Devourers aren't just random predators," she explained. "They're technologically sophisticated, tactically brilliant, and they've been studying human behavior patterns for decades. They know our weaknesses, our psychological pressure points, and exactly how to break down organized resistance." Images flashed across the display showing alien ship designs that incorporated stealth technology, advanced weapon systems, and modifications that suggested extensive experience in hunting intelligent prey. These weren't primitive monsters, they were apex predators with the tools and knowledge necessary to eliminate entire civilizations. More importantly, Admiral Chen continued, they've learned that humans fight differently when we're protecting our own. They've developed specific tactics designed to isolate human populations, prevent coordinated resistance, and eliminate anyone who might organize effective counterattacks. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach as the tactical implications became clear. The Devourers hadn't just been hunting humans randomly. They'd been studying human military psychology and developing countermeasures specifically designed to exploit human protective instincts. "Which brings me to why we're really here," Admiral Chen said, her gaze focusing specifically on the human cadets. "We need individuals who understand both human combat psychology and Federation military doctrine. People who can help us develop integrated defense strategies that combine colonial experience with Federation resources." The request was reasonable on the surface, but Marcus recognized the deeper implications. The Colonials weren't just asking for military cooperation, they were asking the Academy's human cadets to choose between their Federation loyalty and their species loyalty. Before anyone could respond, Instructor Vokmore stepped into the transmission's pickup range, his expression carrying barely concealed hostility. "Admiral Chen, what you're describing sounds remarkably like an attempt to recruit Federation military personnel for private military operations. Such activities would constitute serious violations of interstellar law." Admiral Chen's response was immediate and sharp. "Instructor, what I'm describing is an attempt to prevent genocide. If Federation law prohibits species from defending themselves against extinction, then perhaps Federation law needs to be reconsidered." The exchange highlighted the fundamental problem underlying the entire situation. Federation regulations were designed for peaceful cooperation between member species, not for addressing existential threats to non-member populations. The legal framework simply didn't exist for the kind of military intervention that the Colonials needed. Furthermore, Admiral Chen continued, I should point out that several of the cadets in your academy are actually colonial citizens who chose to attend Federation institutions for educational purposes. They have every legal right to return to their home governments if they choose to do so. The revelation that some academy cadets were actually colonial citizens rather than Federation nationals added another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. If these individuals chose to leave with the colonial fleet, the Academy would be unable to prevent their departure without risking serious diplomatic incidents. Admiral Thextar concluded his urgent communications and returned his attention to the transmission. His expression suggested that his consultations with higher authorities hadn't provided clear guidance for handling the unprecedented situation. Admiral Chen, he said formally, I've been authorized to offer limited humanitarian assistance and to facilitate communication with appropriate Federation agencies regarding your claims about these Devourer attacks. However, I'm not authorized to permit recruitment of Academy personnel or to provide military support for operations outside Federation territory. The response was predictably bureaucratic, offering minimal help while avoiding any commitments that might create political complications. Admiral Chen's expression suggested she had expected exactly this type of response. Admiral Thextar, I appreciate your position, but I need you to understand something. The Devourers aren't going to stop at Federation boundaries, and they're not going to wait for appropriate legal frameworks to be developed. They're coming, and when they arrive, bureaucratic protocols won't save a single human life. She gestured to someone off-screen again, and the display changed to show real-time sensor data from the Colonial Fleet. We've detected Devourer scout ships following our fleet. They know we're here, they know where we are, and they're probably analyzing this academy as we speak, determining its value as a target. The information sent chills through everyone present. If hostile aliens were indeed conducting reconnaissance on the Academy itself, then the emergency lockdown protocols were insufficient to protect the thousands of cadets and instructors currently sheltered in the facility. How long before they attack? Marcus asked, his tactical training overriding social protocols. Admiral Chen's expression was grim. Based on their previous patterns, we have maybe 6 hours before they move from reconnaissance to active assault. They prefer to strike when their targets are confused, isolated, and unable to coordinate effective resistance. 6 hours. The timeline was impossibly short for evacuation or reinforcement, and the Academy's defensive systems weren't designed to repel attacks by technologically advanced hostile aliens. The facility was essentially a university with basic security measures. What do you recommend? Admiral Thextar asked, his tone shifting from bureaucratic authority to military pragmatism. Immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel, activation of maximum defensive measures, and coordination with our fleet for mutual defense. Admiral Chen replied without hesitation. Also, we need to start identifying individuals with relevant combat experience who can assist in defensive planning. Her eyes fixed on Marcus with unmistakable intensity. Some of your cadets have demonstrated capabilities that suggest more than standard academic training. We could use that expertise. The reference to Marcus's recent performances was clear, and he felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. The Colonials needed help. The Academy was potentially under threat, and his fellow cadets were looking to him for guidance that he wasn't qualified to provide. But as the gravity of the situation sank in, Marcus realized that qualification might be less important than willingness to act. The Devourers were coming. The Academy was unprepared, and someone needed to step forward and take responsibility for protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves. Earth's children were about to be tested in ways they had never imagined, and the quiet Deathworlder was running out of time to remain quiet. The galaxy was about to discover that some debts could only be paid in blood, and that some lessons could only be learned through violence. The real war was about to begin, and Marcus Chen was beginning to suspect that all his previous training had been preparation for this exact moment. The Devourers had made one critical mistake in their assessment of human psychology. They had assumed that attacking the pack would scatter the individuals. Instead, they were about to learn why Earth's children were feared across the stars. The Academy's emergency klaxons began sounding exactly 5 hours and 37 minutes after Admiral Chen's warning, their harsh tones echoing through corridors that had become impromptu war zones as students and instructors prepared for an assault that most had never believed possible. Marcus stood in the Academy's primary defensive control center, surrounded by a mixture of colonial military officers, Academy instructors, and fellow cadets who had volunteered for combat roles despite having no legal obligation to do so. The past 6 hours had transformed the peaceful educational institution into something resembling a military command post, complete with tactical displays, weapons distributions, and the controlled chaos of emergency preparations. "Devourer fleet dropping out of hyperspace," reported Lieutenant Sarah Chen of the Colonial Forces, who had beamed aboard to coordinate defensive efforts with her namesake admiral still commanding from orbit. 12 vessels moving in standard hunting formation. They're jamming all communication frequencies except emergency channels. The tactical displays showed a formation that spoke of extensive experience in hunting intelligent prey. The Devourer's ships moved with predatory grace, positioning themselves to cut off escape routes while maintaining optimal attack positions. Their technology was clearly superior to anything the Academy possessed, and their tactical coordination suggested hive mind-level cooperation. Admiral Thexstar stood beside Marcus, his expression grim as he watched the approaching threat. The past few hours had forced the Academy's commandant to reassess everything he thought he understood about defensive strategy and interspecies cooperation. "Mr. Chen," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I've reviewed your academic records and consulted with your instructors. If we survive this engagement, there will be some significant changes to how the Academy approaches combat training and psychological assessment." Marcus nodded acknowledgement while maintaining his focus on the tactical situation. The approaching Devourer ships were moving in patterns that suggested they were analyzing the Academy's defenses and looking for optimal penetration points. Their hunting experience was showing in every tactical decision. "Sir," he said, "I recommend we abandon standard defensive protocols and implement something the Devourers won't expect. What do you have in mind?" Marcus gestured to the defensive display highlighting the Academy's current shield configuration and automated defense systems. "They're expecting institutional resistance, organized, predictable, following established military doctrine. But this isn't a military facility, and we don't have to fight like one." Around them, other officers leaned in to hear his analysis. The young cadet had demonstrated tactical capabilities that exceeded his official training, and everyone was desperate for any advantage against the approaching threat. "The Academy has thousands of students from hundreds of species," Marcus continued. "Each one brings evolutionary advantages that military doctrine doesn't account for. Instead of trying to coordinate traditional resistance, we use those advantages in ways that make the Devourer's intelligence work against them." Lieutenant Sarah Chen frowned. "What specific advantages are you talking about?" Marcus activated a holographic display showing the Academy's student population broken down by species and natural capabilities. The Aquarians can survive in environments that would kill most species. The Saurians can move through spaces that seem impossible. The Centaurians can coordinate through harmonic communication that can't be jammed. The list goes on. He highlighted specific areas of the Academy's structure, showing how different species' natural abilities could be used to create defensive advantages that wouldn't appear on any standard tactical assessment. "The Devourers have been hunting isolated human populations," Marcus explained. "They've developed tactics specifically designed to counter human psychological responses and combat doctrine. But they've never faced coordinated resistance from a mixed species force that includes humans operating at full capacity." Admiral Thexstar studied the proposed defensive plan with growing interest. "You're suggesting we use the Academy's diversity as a tactical weapon?" "I'm suggesting we stop pretending to be something we're not," Marcus replied. "This isn't a military base trying to hold strategic ground. It's a community trying to protect its people. The tactics should match the reality." Before anyone could respond, the Academy's primary shields came under direct assault as the Devourer fleet opened fire with weapons that proved to be significantly more powerful than initial assessments had suggested. The facility's defensive systems, designed for protection against natural disasters and minor hostile encounters, began showing stress signs immediately. "Shields at 70% and falling," reported the Academy's chief engineer. "At current rate of fire, we have maybe 20 minutes before total defensive failure." The timeline was even shorter than the worst-case projections, but Marcus felt something familiar settling into place as the immediate threat clarified his thinking. This was what his father had trained him for, the moment when careful preparation met unpredictable chaos and survival depended on the ability to adapt faster than the threat could evolve. "All right," he said, activating the Academy's internal communication system. "This is Cadet Marcus Chen. All students and instructors, listen carefully. We have approximately 18 minutes to implement emergency defensive protocols using non-standard tactics." His voice carried clearly throughout the facility, reaching thousands of individuals who were huddled in emergency shelters waiting for instructions that their academic training hadn't prepared them to give. "Every species in this academy evolved specific survival capabilities. Right now, we need to use those capabilities to protect each other in ways that our attackers won't expect. Aquarians, report to sections with flooding capabilities. You're our amphibious response teams. Saurians move to heating and ventilation systems. You are our infiltration and reconnaissance forces." The orders continued with rapid-fire precision, assigning roles based on evolutionary advantages rather than academic specializations. Centaurians became communication coordinators, their harmonic abilities allowing coordination through channels the Devourers couldn't intercept. Etherians used their gas form abilities to move through spaces that solid beings couldn't access. Even the normally peaceful herbivorous species found roles that utilized their natural abilities for community defense. "What about the humans?" asked Zixar, who had remained close to Marcus despite having no official military obligations. Marcus paused, considering the question that went to the heart of everything that had happened over the past week. "Humans coordinate. We've evolved to take individual specialists and turn them into functioning teams. It's what we do." The response was simple, but it carried implications that resonated throughout the Academy's command center. Human military psychology wasn't just about aggression or tactical thinking. It was about the ability to organize disparate individuals into effective collective action. As the Academy's defense plan deployed, something remarkable began happening. Students who had spent their entire academic careers studying theoretical cooperation suddenly found themselves engaged in practical collaboration that transcended species boundaries. The Aquarians discovered that their environmental adaptation capabilities could create tactical advantages they had never imagined. The Saurians realized that their stealth abilities could be used for reconnaissance and sabotage operations that traditional military doctrine didn't anticipate. Most importantly, they began functioning as a unified force rather than a collection of individuals hiding from a threat they couldn't understand. The Devourer assault continued with methodical precision, but their tactical assessments hadn't accounted for resistance that combined human coordination with alien capabilities. When they attempted to penetrate the Academy's outer defenses, they found themselves facing opposition that operated according to no recognizable military doctrine. Aquarian teams flooded critical corridors, creating environmental hazards that forced the attackers into defensive positions. Saurian reconnaissance units provided intelligence on enemy movements through channels that sophisticated jamming couldn't detect. Centaurian coordination networks allowed tactical responses that occurred faster than the Devourer's command structure could adapt to. And throughout it all, human cadets and instructors provided the psychological framework that transformed individual capabilities into collective resistance. "Devourer ground forces are pulling back from Sections 7 through 12, reported Lieutenant Chen. Their assault patterns are showing signs of confusion and tactical uncertainty. Marcus nodded while monitoring multiple tactical displays simultaneously. "They're hunters, not soldiers. They're used to prey that reacts predictably to intimidation and overwhelming force. We're not giving them anything they recognize. The Academy's defenders weren't just resisting the assault, they were teaching the attackers that their previous experience hunting isolated humans hadn't prepared them for humans operating as part of a larger community. But Marcus knew that tactical adaptation alone wouldn't be sufficient to achieve victory. The Devourers still possessed superior firepower, advanced technology, and numerical advantages. To truly defeat them, the Academy needed to do more than just resist. They needed to eliminate the threat entirely. "Admiral Chen," he said, activating communication with the colonial fleet, "we need to discuss coordination between your ships and our ground defense. I have an idea that might end this permanently." The plan that Marcus outlined over the next few minutes was audacious to the point of seeming impossible. It required precise timing, absolute trust between species that had never worked together before, and tactical execution that left no margin for error. It also required Marcus to stop being quiet and start being everything that his training had prepared him to become. The final assault began with the Academy's defenders doing something that no military doctrine had ever anticipated. They attacked their attackers. Instead of waiting for the Devourers to penetrate their defenses, mixed-species teams began systematic elimination of enemy forces using tactics that combined human strategic thinking with alien capabilities. The battle that followed would be studied by military historians for decades, not because of its scale or political importance, but because it demonstrated what became possible when human coordination was combined with the full spectrum of galactic evolution. The Devourers found themselves facing opposition that operated according to principles they couldn't understand, using capabilities they hadn't anticipated, coordinated by individuals who refused to accept that survival was impossible.